Hi.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Great. Thank you so much for for joining. Like I wasn't sure, if
Of
you
course.
had the time. So I
Yeah,
really
it's been
appreciate
a
it.
good week. It's gonna get crazy next week, and thank you for having me and for hosting on in St. Louis. I'm so excited to have a conversation with you.
I'm so excited too. I was totally honored because usually I do, like maybe a handful a year, but like just the success of, we are the lucky ones, and then just I think your newest book is what people need to hear. Like people need to remember history, see stories and see resilience. So I'm just really excited and honored. So I have to be really honest, I'm still in the process of reading your book.
Okay, cool.
Um,
Will be
and
a good
so
food for thought as you read.
yeah. Oh my gosh. And I actually we are re-watching the series on Hulu, I think,
Yeah.
because my husband hasn't seen it. So and then you forget. So there's like um just to, just to give some background. But yeah, I cannot wait to see like what happens to Esty, and like just figuring out the future because it starts out with the boy with them running, right? And so I was like, oh, the
There's a
little
little like
boy.
preview. Yeah, so you know
Yeah.
that's sort of like a flash forward. They're gonna be on the run.
I
I love
know.
writing. I know it was it's weird to say I had fun writing about the little boy, but and we were the lucky ones. The only child was Felicia, who's a little girl, like my real life great aunt. And it was beautiful, like very moving to write about her. But having a little boy who I could imagine, and I have two boys at home, so that was really a wild experience, like just kind of remembering what it was like to raise them at that age and like imagining what it would have been like for all these moms of young kids and trying to make the right decision. And just,
I
I mean, it was
know.
equal parts like inspiring and heartbreaking, I guess. But
What inspired you to write One Good Thing?
so honestly, when We Were the Lucky Ones was out and published and out in the world, and actually my second son was born like a week after my book tour ended. So I took a little pause and a breath. And then my editor called to say, what's next? To be honest, I had no idea because I hadn't really thought of myself yet as an author. I was literally like the granddaughter trying to unearth her family story. And that's passion project turned into We Were the Lucky Ones, which turned into the thing that I never would have imagined. But when she called and said, what's next? I like had to say, I'll get back to you in like maybe a long time from now because I'm not sure. So I thought and thought and thought. And my heart and my head kept bringing me back to World War II, to Europe, and to sort of these untold stories of the Holocaust. And I think, the age we live in now, not only is the story super relevant, but there are fewer and fewer survivors left to tell their stories. And not that I was hoping to find, a survivor to interview, but I was just like, it just seems like right now is the time to be recording as many of these stories and remembering them as possible. So I landed back in the same genre of, in that same sort of chapter of history. That was a pretty natural feel. And then where to set it was the next question. And I felt like Italy, I just didn't know much about the Holocaust, the details of Italy's Holocaust era past. And I don't know about you, but like I just don't remember learning about it in school really. I knew the name Mussolini, but like everything was very vague. Like I had no idea. Um,
Right.
so I thought, what a cool thing to be able to like kind of unearth that and tell the story of Italy's history and World War II and Holocaust era past through the eyes, once again, like We Were the Lucky Ones, of a really kind of ordinary young woman, just kind of living her life, and all of this kind of falls upon her. So that interested me. And then Italy is also super special for me because my parents, even though they're both American, were living in Italy when they met. So they were both there for different reasons. My mom was she ran like a really cool dress shop and like clothing shop, and my mom like so cool. I could show you some pictures of the stuff she was importing like from Turkey, and I was like, "Mom, how did you not keep that stuff? It's like the coolest jackets and stuff."
Right. Oh my
And
gosh.
I have so many great pictures. And then my dad was an actor and a writer, so he was have you heard of spaghetti westerns? Um,
Yes, I
yeah, so
have.
he was a cowboy, like a spaghetti western cowboy, which there'll be a character in the book that you meet who kind of reminds Lily of a guy who would have been in a western movie in America, and that's based entirely on my dad and a little bit of my husband too. So that was really like a natural, I was drawn to Italy because they lived there for like combined 17 years. Like they were there for a long time. It was home.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and I grew up hearing stories about it and also traveling there quite often. And I have like a massive bucket list. I want to go to every place in the world, but Italy is the one place I will go back and back and back. It feels like this weird second home. So, I think there was a deep, personal connection to Italy that brought my heart there. And then realizing, oh my gosh, but like I don't really even know what happened in Italy at the time. So this will be fun to research. So between those two things, I decided to try to write the story of Italy's Holocaust and tell it through the eyes of one narrator instead of seven, which I had to do in my first book because there were so many family members to track,
Right.
right?
I'm probably like a fourth of the way in. So I think that I
Have
think
they left Ferrara yet? Have they moved?
so now I'm like, because I had to take a week off from reading. So like this week was just kind of wild because we had winter weather. So I'm like, where did we leave off? I left off where they were staying with the priest.
Okay. So they've left. They did the villa with the refugee children. They've already left there.
Yes.
And now they're in
Yes.
Florence with the priest.
And
Yeah.
they just had like like an attack, like a bomb, a
The
bombing.
allies were dropping bombs. I know it's wild because
Hmm.
they had like, that was so things got bad. And I mean, this is like part of history, so it's not too much of a spoiler, but if you were Jewish, things got really bad when the Germans came and occupied northern Italy, because then like the same, if in Eastern Europe, it was very different. It was like night and day. September 1, 1939, like at least in Poland, where my family was, Poland fell. Germany occupied the country, and your life was at stake immediately if you were Jewish, especially.
Yeah.
In Italy, it was this more of like the slow build. So I mentioned like the racial laws were happening, like little by little,
Hmm.
chipping away at their rights. But like life went on, and they still like dealt with it. And they were like, we're Italian and Jewish, but we're like mostly Italian. And what's going to happen under the eye of the Pope, anyways? Like I don't think that anybody could have
Yeah.
predicted that it would actually things would get bad. But then once it did, it was like not only did they have to worry about being stopped at like a Nazi checkpoint or, by a German on the street, but like bombs, the Allies were trying to drop bombs to like sever supply lines. So they were worried about the Allies and the Axis powers. Both of them were like deadly enemies in a way. So it was a really
Yeah.
awful time to be living there. So yeah, it was also interesting because I had to kind of balance my like love for Italy and this amazing place that I adore. And I adore the people so much with like, no, like it was bad then. It was not good to be living there. And also you didn't know which neighbors you could trust and who would maybe want to turn you in, who would help you if you knocked on their door. So there was lots at play.
I just love your style of storytelling, and you do feel connected to Esty and Lily. You feel connected so much to the characters.
Yeah,
So I
thank
just
you.
think you have such a gift. Where do you find that gift? Like, how do you have such creativity and knowledge? I mean, obviously you do a lot of homework, but is it because your
Yeah.
family's creative, or what is it?
No, I don't know. I certainly I love the research process. So like I dive deep into what happened and I spend a lot of time like making very nerdy timelines and outlines and like going deep into the research. But I don't want my books to read like historical context. Like I want you to feel like you're right there, like in the shoes and hearts and minds of my characters. So then the challenge becomes like, all right, how do I tell this with a really modern, like colorful lens? And I don't know. It's very nice of you to say. Like I write sort of how I speak, so I feel like I have a very conversational tone, which I think appeals to some. And personally, I like when language is easy to read. Like I personally am drawn to that kind of literature where if it's like too fancy and eloquent, I'm like, okay, I get it. You're really good. Like that bumped me out of the story a little bit. So not that I have the ability to even go there. So I feel like, yes, my dad was a writer. So I think just generally growing up in a house where he was writing all the time, I remember some of my very first memories were of the sound of his typewriter. He had like an old school typewriter and he wrote a book when he was writing the book when I was maybe 3 or 4 and it came out when I was 5. I remember holding it and having that sort of thought like, oh, you can write books. Like my dad
Mhm.
wrote a book. You can do that. Now I understand how impossibly hard it is to write a book, but as a kid, it was instilled in me like that's something you can do.
Mhm.
And he's a beautiful writer. My mom is a beautiful writer too, even though she's a little bit more right-brained and analytical. Like I think I maybe got like a little bit of both of them. just in my DNA, but a lot of writers in my family. I didn't major in it. I majored in psychology, which I also kind of think is like, applies to everything. Psychology applies to everything,
Yeah.
like especially
And
with character.
character development.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
And loved my creative writing classes at UVA. They were like some of my favorites, but I never really thought of majoring in it. It was never, again, I didn't go through college thinking I would be a writer. I knew I liked to write, and it was something that didn't come easily, but it was very rewarding experience for me to write. So then once I started researching the story and started talking about it with We Were the Lucky Ones, enough people were like, "That's an incredible story. You need to write that down." Like then I started to have to think about, okay, yeah, I should write it down. How should I write it down? Should it be a blog? Should it be a timeline? Should I self-publish? Should I try to go the traditional route? And little by little, it turned into what it is today. But
And how long was that process then? Probably from the first time you started in,
10
like inquiring, 10 years?
9 years. So like
Wow.
my first interview was in 2008 and it came out in 2017. So yeah, I'm not like a fast prolific writer, and also it was a passion project. There was no agent or editor telling me I had a deadline, so it
Yeah.
was literally just me, and the family's super global. There
Mhm.
I flew to France. We like traded in all of our vacation budgets and our vacation days for 2 summers to travel around and for me to interview my family. So my sweet husband was like all on board, thank God, because I wouldn't have, I don't know, it felt like a luxury to be able to do that, and I didn't have any, I was also working, but like there was
Mhm.
no, I didn't have any paychecks,
Right,
for
right.
the,
Of course. Like when you're self-funded, you're like, oh my God. But hopefully things were different for the second book. I'm sure that like
yeah,
with the pressures
yeah.
of being like, what's next? You're like, oh
Well,
my God,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, no, I was on a podcast yesterday and they were like, does it feel different? How does it feel different? I was like, I feel definitely a sense of pressure. Like, this is a
Yeah.
very, I was so lucky in how well We Were the Lucky Ones was received. And then to be able to go through the process of adapting it and be a part of that,
Mhm.
like that was the most incredible experience of my life, aside from unearthing the family story and then like watching it unfold, all the things that I'd ever imagined, like watching it literally unfold live in front of a camera was just like beyond. So I just feel so lucky that it was so well received. And now this second one, everyone in the publishing industry says your sophomore book is always the hardest. And I get it. It's hard. You just kind of repeating the process. And it would felt very, very different in some ways and similar in other ways. Like very different in that I
Mhm.
made up the whole plot, right? Like I did not, there was no obligation to stick to the family story, which was my only goal with the first one, was like do the family story justice, get it down as authentically as possible. So while there are like real life characters and people and places, like Aldo the priest was a real priest that I read about, and there's Father Nicocci and Assisi and all, like the villa with the refugee children, real villa, real children, like all of those places are real, and the people and characters that Lily and Esty come into contact with, but their story and their plot and where they went was all my imagination. So that was equal
Wow.
parts like really exciting and also kind of terrifying.
Yeah. Have you ever been surprised at where your characters land? Like you're writing and then you go, "Oh, wait a minute. I'm going to do this." And then something surprises you.
Yeah, not with the first one because again, that was the
Yeah.
family story. Those were all stories passed down to me. But with this one, I had that option to see where it went and to see where Lily went and what kind of person she became and who she meets along the way. And I, yeah, I loved not knowing exactly how her story would end. And I'm honestly a little surprised that I ended it the way I did. I won't say anything more than that. So certainly there were moments where I surprised myself. And in the character I mentioned, Thomas, who's based on my father and Robert, I had no idea how fun that would be to write. Like I brought my dad back to life, like it was incredible. It was incredible. So I had no
Oh
idea.
my
I thought this
God.
would be totally different because it wasn't my family, but for me, like I don't know, maybe with book three, I'll like really launch into the fiction world, but I don't really know how to draw characters from people I don't know. You know what I mean? So
Sure. Yeah.
this was a real joy to be able to do that. Yeah.
So wait, are you already saying that there's a book three? That there'll be a third
No,
book?
I'm saying when I do write
Okay.
book three.
Okay.
No, I'm
Okay.
not there yet. I mean, I have
Okay.
ideas swirling, but nothing that I can really talk about just yet.
What does your book teach people about resilience and the necessity to pass stories down. That's, I
Yeah.
guess, two questions in one. So maybe
Yeah.
only one.
I mean, the first book certainly is an example of um, what you can do with an oral history, right? Like by asking questions. And I learned the family history. I learned that I was even a quarter Jewish and came from this family of survivors at 15, and then just started asking questions. And that is certainly a story of resilience as well. I think, I think it's so interesting to put yourself in the shoes of these, again, like kind of ordinary people. I like writing about this age group where they're sort of in the throes of young adulthood and sort of figuring out their lives and what they want to do with their careers and their families. Do they want to have a family, or is there budding romance? And just kind of remember that, like, despite the horrors of the Holocaust and World War II and the things that were happening all around them, life was going on. And
Mhm.
I imagine that I did this for my characters in One Good Thing, and then also imagine that for my family, that they probably clung to those moments of normalcy as a way to get through, as a way to keep going, because otherwise things were too dark and too scary, and there was so much uncertainty and death and destruction. PS, like all the things that were happening around them would have been, I think, for me, too heavy to bear. So I think part of resilience is just living, and it doesn't necessarily mean like picking up a rifle and fighting in the woods, joining the resistance, which, Lily has like a moment where she's like joins up with some partisans. In my family, they were members of the underground, but like, I think it's just, I like when books make you ask the questions, what would I have done? How would I have survived? How would I have been resilient? Does that mean going underground? Does that mean fleeing the country? That's what my grandfather did. He tried to leave,
Mhm.
it eventually made it to Brazil. Does it mean taking on a new identity? Which a lot of my family did. Most of the family that stayed in Europe all took on Aryan IDs. And there's false ID making at in One Good Thing as well. Is
Mhm.
do you convert to Catholicism? Who do you trust? Who don't you trust? So I think, like, for Lily, her resilience comes from putting one foot in front of the other every day, of taking on the small tasks of eventually she's, tasked to take care of this little boy, Theo, and tying his shoe and giving him a hug and playing a game and telling a story, all those little things that we do as moms that we do
Mhm.
naturally. Like, she was trying to use those things to kind of keep him uplifted and also herself uplifted. And then just to kind of have that faith that in herself, like for her, it's a real coming of age, and that she's like has to believe in herself that she can do
Yeah.
it. So to me,
Yeah.
that's the resilience, is like having faith that you can get through in whatever way feels right in the moment.
I can't even imagine being, tasked with taking care of a kid, in the sense that even if you're like kind of like the pseudo aunt, right? Like you're around them all the
Mhm.
time, there's just a difference in
Yeah,
that
we never got
caregiving,
before.
yeah.
You're like
Yeah.
second guessing everything, and yeah, yeah.
Final question, so that because I know you have things to do. Why is your book a good read now? Why do you think, what makes your book an important read for folks now?
Now, yeah, I mean, look, like when I started my research for We Were the Lucky Ones, it was 2008. And if you had ever told me then that like my family's Holocaust survival story would feel so relevant today, like I probably wouldn't have believed you. Like it was in no part a part of my goal was to make some sort of political statement or big sweeping, declaration about anti-Semitism, racism, whatever you want to, So I
Mhm.
think now, though, going into the second book with the state of the world as it is, there's this shocking rise in anti-Semitism, which I don't understand, and that scares me deeply. And I feel like part of that is lack of knowledge. And so anything, I don't know, we can do as a society to help the world understand, like, this is what can happen when people stop seeing each other as human beings. And it doesn't necessarily have to mean if you're Jewish. It's any sort of dehumanizing of someone can lead to really awful things. And I don't know, I feel like, to me, with fewer and fewer people even aware of the Holocaust, like the statistics of how many young people aren't even aware of it today is so
Or don't
scary.
believe it. or
Or
don't
don't
believe
believe
it.
it, that's even worse. Or, and then when you add the rise of anti-Semitism, it just feels like we're at this like boiling point. And if there's a way to reach people that doesn't feel like force feeding them any sort of like lesson, but just like, here's a human story, and here's a way to maybe understand, and maybe through that understanding empathize. I think with empathy, things could start to shift a little bit. I think where there's lack of
Mhm.
knowledge and lack of empathy. And I hope that books like We Were the Lucky Ones and One Good Thing will bring a little bit of both of those things to society. But it is whatever what people want to make of it. Like I'm not trying to like force anything on it. I
Right,
also
right.
like it's, human stories are the way we relate. And as opposed to looking back, it's really hard to look back, especially the Holocaust in statistics. So that it doesn't resonate. Like those statistics are
Yeah.
unfathomable. You can't wrap your head around 6 million. But when it's one person or one family, then you can kind of ask, oh my gosh, like that,
Mhm.
her life doesn't feel all that different than my life, like before the war, like, and then look what happened. So